Welcome to our weekly Bible study. If this is your first time here, especially welcome. We do this every week. That being said, we're not doing this next week. I could not find anybody that would step in and take the lead. So I will be on the other side of the world next week. And the week after, though, we will have one of my colleagues, my good friend, and the guy who took my position after I stepped down at the church, Chris Thayer. He's going to come in the week after. And he's going to teach you guys. I don't think it's going to be from Genesis. I think he's going to come in and teach something else. But he's great. He and I have been to India together and taught. Just a wonderful guy, super nice. I think you'll really enjoy having him here. So treat him well. And then when I come back, you can go back to normal. No, we're in Genesis 19. And for those of you that don't know, every week I try to post the video of the session online. So if you miss a week, or if you want to show somebody, hey, here's what we do every Tuesday, you can show them. The videos are always like 20 to 30 minutes long, and they're on my website, jmsmith.org/blog. Every week they're up there, and they're just titled, Genesis 16, Genesis 17, Genesis 18. So last week's title was Genesis 18, 3 men and a promised baby. And we looked at the 3 men that visited and the promise of Isaac. I don't know what I'll call this one this week. But regardless, we're in Genesis 19. And Genesis 19 is kind of the second half of the story that started in Genesis 18. When you're reading Scripture, remember, you're reading one composite text, one whole document. You're not reading something that was written to be broken up into sections. If you were, let's say you're overseas and your spouse is far away and they wrote you a letter that was, 4 or 5 pages long, you wouldn't just say, okay, today I'm going to read the first page of the letter, and then tomorrow I'll read the next page of the letter. No, you'd read the whole thing through. You'd study the letter, you'd read it as a whole, you'd get the flow of their thought. Well, that's how we should read the Bible. We don't, but it's how we should. And so when we're reading it, it's always important to remember what came before, what's coming after. And the only way we can do that is to read it through multiple times. So with Genesis, it's the same. We have to see that back in chapter 18, God, after he made the promise to Abram, then he said to Abraham, now he's getting his name changed to Abraham, he said, I need to let him in on what I'm going to do. And so he shared with Abraham that he was about to bring judgment on the cities of the plain. The cities of the plain were where Lot had gone earlier and pitched his tent, had gone to live. They're very lush, they're very prosperous and thriving. The text also said they're very wicked. And we see now that God comes and basically lets Abraham in on, hey, the wickedness of this city these cities have reached its full measure. And that harkens back to Genesis 15, where God promised Abraham, or Abram at the time, he was going to give him all of the land of Canaan. But he said, I'm not going to give it to you until 400 years have passed, because the wickedness of the Amorites, the people living in the land, has not yet reached its full measure. So there's an idea, we see it in Scripture, that God allows sin to go for a time, but at some point, he says, enough is enough. And he does it at certain points throughout the Old Testament. And it's not arbitrary, it's not haphazard, it's when wickedness is utterly decayed a society to an irreparable point, and redemption as a whole is no longer possible. Now, within that, though, there are individuals who are able to be redeemed. You'll see it when Israel enters the land, when they enter Jericho. The whole city's destroyed, but yet Rahab and her family are spared. You see it with the flood of Noah. God said the whole world, all of human hearts are wicked all the time, except Noah and his immediate family are spared. So there are specific times of individuals being spared the judgment that overall engulfs a nation of people, an area, whatever. And so we see God shares this plan with Abraham, and then back up in chapter 18, verse 23, Abraham approached the Lord, which is pretty bold, and he said to him, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? It's his question is, Lord, if you destroyed the cities of the plain, my nephew's there. Why? And he does not deserve that judgment. He's not that wicked. That's the subtext, what Abraham's thinking at this point. And so he sort of enters into this bartering system with God, where he says, okay, how about if there are 50 righteous people, will you spare the city? And God says, Yeah, I will. Abraham was probably thinking, okay, God will come back with a counteroffer of like 200 or 500 or something, and they'll meet in the middle. But rather, God actually says, yeah, I'll do it. And then so Abraham says, well, okay, how about if they're 45? And God says, yeah, I'll spare it. 45. Okay, how about if they're, and he's very hesitant, but he's also very bold in suggesting he gets it all the way down to 10. And the idea is that if there can be found 10 righteous people in this area, God won't destroy it. And this sets up the overriding mercy of the Lord, so that when we get to his judgments in Scripture, we don't do what so many Christians who don't know their Old Testament do, which is they read Old Testament passages of judgment and they say, why is God so mean in the Old Testament? That's just ignorance of the Hebrew Bible. And it's the fault of most Christians and Christian teachers, is we don't teach people from the beginning the nature of God, which is one, to show mercy and to show judgment and to allow sin, even grievous sin, to go on for a long period of time before finally bringing that judgment to pass. God's character in the Old Testament is every bit as loving and as merciful as it is in the New Testament. The difference is the Old Testament covers a span of thousands of years, and God has much more time to exercise his judgment on nations in the Old Testament than in the New Testament, which only spans maybe 50 or 100 years and focuses on one area of the world. So don't buy into that lie. Don't buy into that pseudo-Christian myth that the God of the Old Testament is angry and mean and always vengeful and wrathful and raining down judgment. Because Genesis says absolutely not. That's not the heart of God. And God answers Abram, and he's willing to say, I'll spare this I'll allow this wickedness to go on if you can just find me 10 righteous people, 10 innocent people. And so that's what we're going to see in this chapter. So the 3 men that visited Abraham, we realize that at least 2 of them are what we'll call angels, because they're going to be identified right in chapter 19 as such. And the one that remained, there's 2 views that different interpreters have taken. One view has said the 3 men that visit Abraham, one is God in man form, which is setting a precedent for the incarnation in the New Testament. God can appear as a man and still be God. It doesn't mean it's Jesus that shows up, the pre-incarnate Christ or any of those things. It just means that God can show up as a man. He can show up as a burning bush. He can show up as a cloud of smoke and fire. God can do what God does. So one view says God is one of the men, and the other 2 are the angels that he sends to Sodom. The other view says all 3 men together are the appearance of God to Abraham, and 2 of the men go to Sodom. The other goes to Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain that are destroyed. But we only get to see what's happening with the ones in Sodom. Either or, doesn't matter to me. I think both have valid points to be made. Regardless, God is once again, like he did at Babel, coming down and actually interacting with the people that he's about to judge. He's that language of coming down. Does God need to come down so he can see what's going on? Not at all. He comes down and he enters into the story of humanity. God doesn't just throw out judgments left and right. He's not like Zeus throwing lightning bolts from heaven just for his own joy. When something big is about to go down, God appears or takes extra measure to ensure that his justice is being carried out, and it's true justice. So, with that being said, we get to 19, verse 1. It said, oh, right on time, the garbage truck. I always hear that on the video. I'm like, yeah, garbage truck. All right. I'll read louder. It says, the 2 angels arrived in Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them, bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet, spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we'll spend the night in the square. But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. We're going to pause there. Now, Lot is, as we meet him, Abram, when we met him in the last chapter, was sitting at the entrance of his tent. Lot is sitting at the entrance of the city gate. In the ancient Near East, cities were built with walls. This is before there's a police force, before there's National Guard, before there's neighborhood watch. Cities were built with walls, and there was usually one main gate. And it was heavily fortified, and it had some rooms, or you can look at different floor plans online. You can Google Ancient Near East City Gate, and you'll see they were very elaborate. They were defensive, but they were also judicial and administrative. When you went to the city gate, it was like going to City Hall to do something. Judgments were carried out at the city gate. Financial transactions were carried out at the city gate. Dealings involving land or inheritance or claims were carried out at the city gate. Elders and witnesses sat at the city gate. Officials of the city sat at the gates of the city was like City Hall. It was the main place things were going on, and it's where you found the leaders. So someone sitting at the city gates doesn't mean Lot's just hanging around. He has a function. He has a role. He's a city leader. In whatever capacity, he is one of the leaders of the city, or at the very least, highly influential in this city. And so when the men come, it's sort of getting in the afternoon. They come, they arrive, and they say, we're gonna hang out. We're gonna spend the night in the square, the open area of the city where you could come. And people in some cities, travelers would spend the night in the square, but it was pretty shameful because it meant that no one had showed them hospitality. Remember what we said last week? Hospitality in the ancient Near East, we don't have a parallel in our culture in terms of how much is expected when you're received guests in the ancient world. And even today in the Middle East, the hospitality is legendary. You think Southern hospitality? Not even close. Southern hospitality can't hold a candle to ancient Near East hospitality. The idea was you take somebody, if they come into your city, you show them, you provide for their needs. You take them in as part of a reflection of who you are and your family and your name, your reputation. Everything is involved in how you treat your guests. And those relationships, even, as we'll see, supersede family relationships sometimes. They shouldn't necessarily, but in the culture of the day and the status, and it's a way of showing the utmost hospitality to a stranger, and that reflects well on you or your family or whoever. So Lot, in this case, offers them, no, come stay at my house. And so he brings them in, and he makes them some bread without yeast. Bread without yeast means it's quick, it's hasty. That's why you don't put yeast in bread if you want to make it fast. This will come into play in the Exodus when the Israelites are told to make bread without yeast so that you can get up and go at any moment because the Passover is going to come. So Lot, as opposed to Abraham, last week, the meal that Abraham prepared, remember 5 gallons worth of flour used, like 60 loaves of bread, a full calf. Like he went all out. Lot just kind of, let me throw some stuff from cupboard together. And it's getting late in the afternoon, come in, I'll fix you a little Hot Pocket or something. So he sends them in there. They eat. Now, verse 4. Before they'd gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may," depending on your translation, this will either say, "so that we may know them," "so that we may get to know them," "so that we may meet them," or if you have NIV, "so that we can have sex with them." Now there's a big difference in those range of translations. But the Hebrew term is "so that we may know them," yada. And it's the same term that was used when Adam knew his wife Eve, when Cain knew his wife. To know is a biblical euphemism for to have sexual relationships with. It's the standard idiom that's used for that. And there's been debate, and the reason I mention this is because there are scholars who will try to argue or make the point, and sometimes they do a fairly good job of, getting around in this case, what would be the plain meaning. They say, no, what's happening is they wanted to know, they wanted to meet, they wanted to see who these strangers were. Because remember, this is Sodom. They had just been routed, and all of their men and wives and children had been taken away by the 5 kings, or by the 4 kings a couple of chapters ago, back in chapter 14. So they're 13 or 14. Whichever one. And Abram had to go with a samurai and go take him and rescue him. So they say, there's good reason for the men of Sodom to be concerned when 2 mysterious strangers, who could very well be spies, coming back to do the same thing that had been done before. Sodom, the town would have been highly vigilant. The king of Sodom would have been on guard. People coming into the city would have been viewed with suspicion. So in this case, what the crowd was doing was saying, hey, get them out here so that we can interrogate them. And in the ancient Near East, interrogation was not a pretty thing. a lot worse than waterboarding or any of the other forms of acceptable torture that we know today. It would have been disastrous. So some people argue, well, that's what's going on. That Lot's afraid, they want to interrogate these people, and Lot says, no, they've come under my protection and they're innocent. And the problem with that view is that it doesn't quite make sense of Lot's response. Mm-hmm. Because in response to it, look what Lot says. Verse 6, Lot went outside to meet them, shut the door behind him, and said, no, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters who've never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you want with them. But don't do anything to these men, for they've come under the protection of my roof. So we get the sense that they don't just want to meet these people. There's a lot more, because to meet them is not a wicked thing. So Lot's response really undercuts the revisionist readings of trying to say, well, it's not like there was just a bunch of men trying to have sex with these angels in this case. Their response, verse 9, get out of our way, they replied. And then they said almost to one another, this fellow came here as an alien, talking about Lot, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them. They kept bringing pressure on Lot and moved forward to break down the door. But the men inside reached out, pulled Lot back into the house, and shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, young and old, with blindness, so they couldn't find the door. 2 men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, son-in-law, sons or daughters, anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we're going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against his people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. Now, a couple of things are going on here. This passage has given rise to a lot of traditional readings, or like most well-known Bible stories, we just kind of think we know what's going on in the story. And in particular, the incident of the city of Sodom has given rise to a term in English, which is sodomy, and is even used in some translations of the New Testament as sodomites, which refers to men who have sex with other men. Now, there's a lot involved in that issue and how the Bible portrays same-sex sexual relationships. And at its core, the judgment against Sodom is not because there's a bunch of gay people there. It's not. Now, I want to be very careful because I don't want to miscommunicate the wrong thing. The Bible does speak, I do believe, and I'd be happy to argue with anyone, I do believe the Bible does teach that same-sex sexual relationships are prohibited. They were in the Old Testament, and it's reaffirmed in the New Testament. However, every time the Bible speaks about the judgment on Sodom, like in Ezekiel when the prophets mention, or how wicked Sodom was, the sexual sin's not even mentioned. It's their overall rampant evil, their greed, their idolatry, their violence, their deceit, their oppression of the innocent, all of it. What I want to suggest is this reading, their response to these men. Hey, almost like this prison gang rape type scenario, which is a pleasant thing to talk about at lunch. But that's the response that these men are giving. That is the symptom, or that is shows how wicked they had become at their core. They're violating every rule of decency in how you would treat guests in the ancient Near East. And it's like they could not be more evil, inhospitable, corrupt, wicked, violent, all of that wrapped in one. So I want us to get away from, if you're having discussions with people about the issue of homosexuality and things like that, it's a culturally sensitive issue in our day and age. It's an explosive political issue right now. I just did a blog post on it last week. And it's a very divisive and polarizing issue. But the story of Sodom doesn't really have a lot to say to the current issues in terms of same-sex relationships in our culture, unless you're arguing with someone that thinks homosexual gang rape is acceptable, which I don't know of anybody that does. It's pretty much guaranteed across the board. The behavior of the men of Sodom was absolutely deplorable, and that is meant to show us that the judgment that God is about to bring on this city is the just and the righteous judgment that they as a city, as a society, had brought upon themselves through their wickedness, of which their treatment of the men in this case is just a symptom. So I only make that aside because the term sodomite has entered into the English language, and it's really not, it's a very convoluted path of how that term got there. So just know that's the background. This is what's going on in the story, and they're and it's a threat. These men who they don't know who they are being threatened with extreme violence, humiliation, inhospitality, everything you can imagine. But what the men of the city don't realize is that these aren't ordinary visitors. These are the angels of the Lord. So, the angels of the Lord, they strike the men with blindness. The term is used only elsewhere one other time when the armies of the king can't see all of the heavenly armies, and then their blindness is removed and they can see what's going on. So it's possible that this is like more than just blind. I mean, most of us know blind people. They don't have problems finding doors. Like it's not like if you're blind, you're just walking around bumping into stuff. So it's more than just they couldn't see. There's some struck them with some type of confusion, blindness, disorientation, whatever it is, to rescue Lot and anyone in his household. There's another interesting thing. Look what they say. Do you have anyone else here, sons-in-laws, sons or daughters? Now, the text just said, all the men of the city, young and old, all of them came to the door. Was it really all of them, or is that a biblical, normal, euphemistic way of basically saying pretty much everybody? Are there exceptions to the all? I think there's reason to believe that there are, because look, what does Lot do? Verse 14, so Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who were pledged to marry his daughters, and he said, hurry, get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. So the sons-in-law seem to not be part of all the men of the city that were struck with this blindness and whatever it is. I want you to note that, because there are these tiny little parts of Genesis throughout the whole book where all doesn't always mean all. And we have to be careful when we build our theology, because a lot of times people's views of things appeal to, well, it says all. So just note that. Tuck it away. It may not ever become important to you, but keep that in mind, because as you're reading Scripture, that will help make sense of a lot of supposed contradictions. Their response, but his sons-in-law thought he was joking, or thought it was a laughing thing. The Hebrew text kind of says, thought it was as laughter. The word Isaac, that word laughter, pops up again. It's been a running theme throughout the past few chapters. So they think he's just joking. Verse 15, with the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot. Now this has been all night. This is going on. From sundown is when the crowd gathered, and then all through the night. Hurry, take your wife and 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. You will be swept away. Once again, what did Abraham ask God in the last chapter? Will you sweep away the innocent with the wicked? The implied answer is no. So in this case here, God is making good on his promise to Abraham. He's not going to sweep away the innocent with the wicked. Also interesting to note, when God's cataclysmic judgment comes, whether it's flood, whether it's fire, to be on the receiving end of that judgment is referred to as being swept away or taken away. To be swept away or be taken away, implying you want to be the ones who are left. Meaning you want to be left behind, which is the title of my book, which has to do with the rapture, but that's a different subject. Being taken is a bad thing in the Bible almost every time. I don't know of many exceptions to that rule when that language is used. Verse 16, when Lot hesitated, the men grabbed his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. As soon as they brought them out, one of them said, flee for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, no, my lords, please. If your servant has found favor in your eyes, you will show great kindness to me you've shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here's a town near enough to run to, and it's small. Let me flee to it. It's very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared. So even in the midst of this impending judgment, you start to see Lot is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Lot makes poor decisions. Universally in Genesis. I don't know of a good decision he makes at any point in the narrative. Maybe taking the 2 men into his house is the closest thing comes to a good decision. But he says, I can't flee all the way to the mountains in the distance. Here's a little city over here, and the city's name is Zoar, and Zoar just means small. It's one of the cities of the plains that they're familiar with. Let me go there and hide. So he doesn't really get the sense of how this destruction is going to happen, but maybe this small city will be overlooked if say, a big army comes through to destroy it, like they kind of did last time. So maybe that's what Lot's thinking. Who knows? But the angel's response, verse 21, he said to him, very well, I'll grant this request too. I won't overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly because I can't do anything until you reach it. That's why the town is called Zoar, which means small, and it's this little oasis area in today what's a desert, salty, dead wasteland. Verse 23, by the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens, or out of the sky, same word in Hebrew. Thus he overthrew those cities and the entire plain, parentheses, except Zoar. All doesn't always mean all. And also the vegetation in the land. Oh, and all those living in the cities, and also the vegetation in the land. Verse 26, but Lot's wife had looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Okay, so now here's another example where the story and the movies and the cartoons get it wrong. I remember growing up watching cartoons of this, those Bible adventure cartoons or dramas about it. And it would be like they're running away, and as they're running, Lot and his daughters are run, and there's just fire coming down. And then Lot's wife just kind of glances, and then bam, pillar of salt. That's not what the text says. The text, first of all, says God doesn't start the destruction until Lot and his daughters reach the city of Zoar, until they're safe. Which means that if Lot's wife was engulfed in the judgment, she was not with them in Zoar. She had stayed behind. The text, the angel says, don't look, don't tarry. And it's a way of saying, equating the two things. By looking, it doesn't mean don't glance. It means don't hang around to watch what's going on. Don't look longingly back. Don't get out of there. And Lot's wife is in this case turned to a pillar of salt because she didn't. She's not at Zoar where Lot and his daughters are. She stayed. She didn't just glance. She stayed in the plain. The other thing is, what does it mean she turned into a pillar of salt? Did she just turn into a salt statue? This is where, again, you can't be certain 100% in explaining all these things, and be very wary of people that try to explain Bible miracles, because sometimes you can't. But in this area, we already know from previous chapters, back when the kings came through and routed and took it already said in the area of Sodom there were all these tar pits, and some of the people fell into them as they were escaping. So we know that the area it's volcanic. It's right on the Great Rift Valley that runs all the way from the Dead Sea all the way down to Kenya. It's on where plate tectonics happen, so it's on a volcanic area, earthquake-prone area. There are poisonous or toxic or noxious chemicals there, tar pits. Some of the chemicals that have been found in the salt minerals around the Dead Sea are sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium chloride, bromide. In other words, this could very well, if you want to say what did it look like, could very well be an earthquake came, ignited this potent, violent mixture of chemicals that were explosive and that rained down like a volcano on all of the cities of the area, coating everything in this deep, thick layer of burning, sulfurous, salty deposits of minerals. So Lot's wife becoming a pillar of salt. If you go there now, even Josephus wrote about that area, there were these human-sized pillars of salt, these minerals deposited over the years. So it could very well be that she was engulfed by that, coated by that, as were a lot of other people. And that's where these salt pillars were made.